The ocean was flat and endless when I first noticed it in the wake behind our ship. At first it looked like nothing more than a dark knot of debris in the chop, the kind of thing you see 100 times on long crossings and forget a minute later. Then it lifted its head, round ears, wet muzzle, heavy shoulders rolling with each swell. A bear, alive, floating in the middle of nowhere. I called Mason over and pointed. He stared for a second, then swore softly, the word carried away by the wind. We were hundreds of miles from the nearest coast, on a freight run between Alaska and Canada. Seabirds, whales, maybe the odd seal made sense out here. But a bear, alone in open water, did not belong to this world. I radioed the bridge and reported what we were seeing. The captain answered with a pause that told me he already hated this situation. He gave the only order that fit the manual. Maintain course, do not engage, wait for instructions from the Coast Guard. On paper it sounded reasonable. In reality, it meant watching a living creature slowly drown under our stern lights. As the ship moved forward, the bear stayed in our wake, fighting the pull of the water with slow, stubborn strokes. It did not thrash or panic. It simply refused to sink. When it rolled on a wave, I saw the raw band of skin around its neck, a pale ring where fur had been worn away. Something used to be there. A collar, a chain. Later that night, Tyler, our radio man, mentioned traffic he had heard 2 days earlier. A freighter named Siberia Dawn had lost a container of live animals after a crane failure near Dutch Harbor. Most of the stock had been recovered. One animal was still missing. A male brown bear, trained for a traveling show, listed as property on an insurance form and nothing more. The distance, the currents, the timing, everything lined up. We were staring at that missing asset now, barely staying afloat in black water. By then the captain had already called the Coast Guard. They promised to send a rescue boat, but warned it would take hours to reach us. The official advice was simple. Keep visual contact, do not attempt recovery, prioritize crew safety. We all understood the logic. We also watched the bear sink a little deeper with every passing wave. Logic felt thin against the weight of that. At some point, doing nothing became harder than the risk of acting. Mason and I went below deck and dragged out a heavy cargo net, still damp from the last port. We rigged it to the crane arm, hands shaking more from anger than from cold. Tyler brought lines and checked the knots twice. No one said the word rescue, but we all knew what we were doing. When the captain finally stepped out onto the deck and saw the net stretched and ready, he just looked at us for a long moment. Then he turned his face to the wind and said quietly, "Do what you think you have to." We lowered the open net toward the water until the mesh kissed the surface. The ship idled, engines pulsing low, trying to hold position in the swell. At first the bear did not react. Then the splash and the change in sound drew its attention. It turned its head, eyes dull from salt, burn, and exhaustion, and started to move toward us. The sea did not make it easy. Each time the animal gained a few feet, a wave shoved it sideways or buried it in foam. It disappeared completely once, long enough for my chest to clench, then surfaced again, coughing and snorting, still aiming for the dark mouth of the net. Mason gripped the winch controls so hard his knuckles went white. Tyler braced himself by the railing, ready to haul on the guidelines. When the bear finally reached the edge of the net, it tried to climb with the last of its strength. Its front paws caught the mesh, claws scraping rope. The net dipped under the combined weight of water and muscle. The crane cable screamed. For a heartbeat it felt like the entire ocean was trying to come aboard with him. The ship rolled. I shouted for the bridge to turn us into the waves. The captain reacted instantly, swinging the bow to meet the swell. The next wave passed under us instead of over us, and the net steadied. Mason engaged the winch. Slowly, groaning in protest, the crane lifted the heavy shape out of the water. What dangled above the deck did not look like a fearsome predator. Water streamed from a body that had burned through every reserve. Ribs showed through the matted fur. The eyes were half closed, not wild with rage but clouded with a tired sort of confusion. We guided the swaying net toward the open ramp and lowered it to the steel. When the ropes slackened, I dropped to my knees and cut a corner of the mesh. The net fell away and the bear rolled onto its side, chest heaving. Up close I could see scars under the fur, old burns on the pads of its paws, and the torn scrap of leather still hanging from the neck. Mason pressed his hand lightly against the ribs and whispered that it was breathing. Tyler brought blankets, and we covered the massive body, building a windbreak from tarps and crates to keep the worst of the cold away. We kept watch through the night, taking turns sitting by the animal while the ship creaked around us. The captain stayed nearby, saying little, smoking more than usual. No one on board talked about heroism. We were just trying to make sure the creature in front of us had a chance to see land again. At dawn, the rescue cutter finally arrived. Their crew came aboard with equipment and tranquilizers, but when they saw the state of the bear, they moved more gently than the manuals probably told them to. Using the same net we had dragged through the water, they slid a stretcher underneath and lifted him once more, this time toward help rather than away from death. The deck felt strangely quiet after they left. Weeks later, when our route took us back through Vancouver, I used my shore leave to visit the wildlife center that had taken him in. The place sat in a green valley, far from the noise of the docks. A handler led me to an enclosure with a small pond and trees. There, under the shade, lay a heavier, cleaner version of the same animal, Boris, the former circus bear who had floated behind our ship like a lost piece of wreckage. The wound around his neck was healing. His fur looked less dull. When I stepped closer to the fence, he lifted his head and stared at me for a long, steady moment. I did not call his name. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, breathing the same damp air. After a while, he blinked, slowly, and lowered himself into the water, sending gentle ripples across the pond. On the next voyage, I found myself watching our wake again. The ocean was as empty as ever, wide and indifferent. But something in me was different. We could not fix where that bear came from or what had been done to him before. All we had was one decision, made on one rough afternoon, when we chose not to look away. Sometimes that is all you get. Sometimes it is enough.